Hi, everybody. Megan Thompson here, and I wanted to talk about an important topic for you guys this evening. And this is the understanding of fear and love and how it impacts your ability to parent effectively, especially when you're parenting a highly sensitive child. So, there's been some discussion in this group this past week regarding how to parent, how to teach your child who's experiencing intense emotions, and in particularly related to corporal punishment, spanking, and other forms of corporal punishment as might be used, like smacking your kid, things of that nature. And so, what's important to recognize is that we're not going to dive into why that's been proven to be ineffective for many, many years. What I'm going to do is why it doesn't actually help you get to where you need to be. I've already spoken about why corporal punishment doesn't work with parenting any child, but I really want to get into the core of that and why that is true without necessarily speaking about those tactics, timeouts, sticker charts, corporal punishment like spanking, and whacking your kid upside the head to teach them a lesson, any of that jazz, nose against the wall, sitting in the corner, all of those shame-based parenting strategies I use with air quotes, because they are not effective at reaching the end goal, which is raising a healthy, emotionally healthy and intellectually healthy and academically healthy and lovingly healthy child. If that's your goal, then those approaches are not going to get you where you want to be. So I could go on a soapbox for that for eons, and certainly could do to the night. But that's not the focus that I want to get at. What I want to do today is really talk about fear, and talk about one of the things that one of the parents had mentioned in one of the threads that was pretty active over the weekend is, how can I be conceived as not loving my child when I use corporal punishment, when I use these types of punishments. And I have to, I've taken some time this week to really understand what this parent was saying and what some of you were thinking, and maybe what your spouses are thinking or your co-parents of that nature. And again, if you're here, say hi, and hashtag replay if you catch this on the replay. Ask questions, of course. When and Porter is striking again. Last week he was like, "Hey, what's up, Mom? I want to go outside." Doing that again. Thanks, bud. So, fear. I want to talk about fear. I want to talk about why it's important for you to be aware that you cannot fear as a parent and love as a parent at the same time. So, we're going to get into emotions and the brain and your child's brain development as a reflection of your own brain development in just a minute, because I'm on the science kick for you guys lately, if you haven't picked up on that. And go ahead and watch my last couple of lives if you haven't caught them, because we're really understanding the neuroscience and the research related to highly sensitive children and why you need to raise them a certain particular way. Otherwise, you end up a statistic. 50% of highly sensitive kids end up in therapy. Highly sensitive people make up 50% of the population who goes to therapy, I should say. I misquoted myself. Which means, 20% of the population, 1 out of every 5 is highly sensitive. But 50% of them end up in therapy. Something's going wrong. So watch my previous videos to understand why that is. What we're going to talk about today is why fear is not something that should be driving how you parent. Now, when we think about what a shame-based parenting approach is, timeouts, corporal punishment, all of that, it's based in fear. My kid won't learn unless I exert power over my kid. I'm going to exert power and teach them by making them do something uncomfortable. So I am creating fear in my child by teaching them a lesson and creating discomfort for my child so that they fear taking that previous action again, and so that they learn to never do it again. So why is this not effective? Well, it's not effective because fear does not teach us how to love. And if we want our children to be emotionally healthy, then we cannot teach them how to love through fear. And we cannot love them if we are fearful of who they may become. And so if we are trying to parent our children based in fear, with the approach towards parenting based in fear, then we are not effectively parenting our children. And I really I use that word effective because, again, I take judgment off the table. It could very well be how many of you were raised and how you survived your childhood. It was justifying that your parents were doing what was best for you. And so I'm not here to say that there's something wrong with you if you've had those thoughts as a parent, that this is the way to go for your kid, or if you've used those strategies in the past. What I am here to say is that you're here for a reason. You're in this group for a reason, and you're in this group because you've experienced discomfort in the way that you're currently raising your child. So that discomfort might be because you're dealing with daily meltdowns, and that fucking sucks. Or it could be that you're managing intense emotion and you don't want to see your kid sad all day or every day. And it could be that your kid is just constantly irritable and you've got your shoulders up to your ears and you just can't freaking deal with it anymore. And if that's the case, that discomfort has led you to want to learn about something new. Hi, Hope. Oh, good to see you. And so it's been a bit. How you doing? And so if that's what's going on, if you're experiencing that discomfort is playing into your sense, your inner heart's ability to say, hey, maybe what I'm doing isn't quite working well. And if that's the case, then you need to listen to that. You need to listen to your heart and you need to say, hey, wait a minute, I need to learn. And so here you are, right? It's not working. Let me look this up. Google tells you to come to my group. Facebook tells you to come to my group. It's the same shit. And you're here, right? You're learning. And so that's great. And it's also true that if you're learning from a place of fear and you're trying to perpetuate your child's learning through a place of fear, then you will not be able to effectively love your child. So I'm not questioning whether or not you love your child. That's not what we're getting at here. I'm blunt in this by saying that if you want to raise your child to be loving, if you want to raise your child in love, if you want to raise your child with the expectation that I love my child and I love all the possibilities of who they can become, then I cannot, as a parent, operate from a place of fear. I cannot make decisions on how to parent my kid when I am fearful of who they may become. So what does that mean? What that means is that when you're experiencing fear and you're trying to teach your child through fearful means, recap for those who just popped on, creating fear for your kid, to fear you or to fear the punishment, so therefore they won't do it again, then you are allowing your own fear of what might happen for your kid play out, and it actually perpetuates the problem. That child then starts to understand that they are someone to be feared, and that their behavior is to be feared, and that the punishment is to be feared. And what happens next? Life is fearful. So if you're a highly sensitive kid, you start creating that rule for yourself. And what happens next? They start coming to you and saying, Mommy, I can't do it. There's no point. I don't know what to do next. And they quit. And you start raising a quitter. And that is super, super hard to deal with, because you, as a parent, if you're here, I know that you're high achieving. I know that you're focused on wanting to raise your child the best way possible. And so if that's the case, and you see that your kid is really starting to quit early or struggle and see no longer the possibility, but what's the worst that could happen, then it can be very discouraging. And so when that starts to get discouraging, you start to figure out, okay, what am I doing not effectively? What's not working? And so you have to understand that if you are operating from a place of fear, then you're not in that moment operating from a place of love with your kid. So I want to get into why I know that to be true, because some of you might be highly sensitive people. And so you might say, Megan, I'm highly sensitive. I feel all the feelings all the time. So how do you know I can't have fear and love at the same time? Now, let's get clear here. I'm not saying you can't feel fear and love at the same time. You could fear for your child and love them. But what I'm saying is, by the time you make a decision about how to parent them, and what actions to take and what steps to take them or when to take those steps, that decision is either fear-based or love-based. Because action happens in the logical side of the brain and is justified by the emotion. So if you're taking action towards waiting and seeing, then you're justifying it by fear. This might not be that big of a problem. I don't need to worry about it. I don't want to look at it if it's a big problem, so let me just wait and see. What's that? That's passivity. That's the flight mode, if you've heard of, fight, flight, or freeze. That's just, floating along, hoping things will go well. And so you're operating and you're making a decision to parent with fear. Doesn't mean you don't love your kid. So it's not just whether or not you choose to use corporal punishment or other punishments in your household. There's also many ways to parent your child through fear. If you're dealing with daily meltdowns and you're not taking an active focus to fix the problem right away, and your child is over any age, because daily meltdowns for any age is not developmentally appropriate, but multiple times a day meltdowns are not appropriate either. And 2-year-olds can go a day without experiencing meltdown. 2-year-old highly sensitive children can go days without experiencing meltdowns. And so it's very important, and I can sometimes sound like a broken record when I say this, but it's very important for you to be aware that parenting a highly sensitive child does not need to include daily meltdowns. It's not developmentally appropriate for any kid. It means that they're very sad. It means that they're confused. It means that they're overwhelmed. And it means that they're fearful of their own capacity to manage their own emotions, so they don't feel capable of using the skills you're trying to teach them. So when you operate from fear and parent from fear, your child learns that that's how I need to operate. So I want to talk about this because when we think about how children's brains develop, they develop through the brain of their parent. So, outside of, giving birth in your brain, if you're a mom, and you gave birth to your kid, then, your brain tells your body what to do. Your body tells it what to do. It develops the brain of your child, sure. And after your child is born, regardless of whether or not you were the one who gave birth to your child, your brain still impacts the brain development of your child. So let's talk about this. So again, I have my green brain. Green's my favorite color. And we're going to go into understanding how the brain works and how you cannot operate from fear and love at the same time. So if you're a parent and you're operating from fear, and for me, I hope you guys can see this the right way. It's showing up for me like you can read the words, but hopefully you can. Otherwise, what really matters is the structure of the brain and where my finger is rather than the words, but hopefully not throwing you off by giving you the mirror effect here. So what's going on in the brain when you're fearful is the deep limbic system, which is the caveman part of your brain, down in the skull, of course, of the skull, where the skull meets the spine. That's this part of the brain. So you match me, right? See this temporal lobe here? Down here in the skull, base of the brain. The deep limbic system is where you experience fear. Yeah, let me get my angles right. So when you experience fear, you cannot act upon anything else because it's taking over your decision-making processes. And when this part of the brain is working and in charge, then the front part of the brain, which is your frontal lobe, which is the part of the brain that makes decisions based on the assessment of consequences, not a part of the brain that's developed for children, which is why we don't teach timeouts, because they don't freaking remember that the timeout might happen when they're in that moment. But that's another story. If you're in this part of the brain operating from fear, then you cannot operate from love, because love sees possibility, and love sees positive qualities, and love feels good, and love feels amazing, and love feels focused on the future. Fear feels focused on the past and the worst case scenario. So when we operate from fear, our temporal lobe cannot use the same part of the brain. Emotions happen in the same part of the brain, in the temporal lobe, along with other parts of the brain, but for simplicity's sake, we're going to talk about that today. Love also happens in the temporal lobe. So if fear is taking over your brain, then love can't be acted upon. You have to use love to calm yourself down and then act with a positive focus on your child. That means you can't operate from fear and love at the same time. You either choose to fear your child's future and fear how you're capable as a parent and choose to act from that decision, or you choose to love the possibility of your family and the possibility of how life will turn out, and you act from that. So you can feel both things at the same time, but you cannot act from both things at the same time. You have to choose one. It's just the way the brain works. So what that means is that in any given time, if you are fearful of how your kid is going to turn out, and you choose to act upon your fight or flight mode, which is to either freeze and wait and see, or flee, which is avoid the problem and not look at it, head in the sand kind of thing, or fight and say, kid, get your shit together because I can't deal. And you know me, I'm saying it like this, but it might be, I told you, that question's been asked and answered, or I told you that we would talk about it tomorrow. I'm done talking about it. All of that, that's a fear-based, powerful body emotion, negative emotion in your body that's dictating how you speak to your kid. And that happens when you're dealing with daily meltdowns and you reach your breaking point. And so if you're dealing with daily meltdowns, you probably reach your breaking point multiple times during the day. And if that's the case, then your body is on automatic in terms of responding from fear. So if that's going on, then your brain starts to see fear as a viable means of dictating behavior. Now, here's the thing. If you're parenting and you're in a safe environment, like most of us are, whether we're in a, you're watching me on Facebook, that means you can, you can operate a cell phone or have an internet connection. That means you're in probably a first world country. Most of you are in the US. It means that it's unlikely that a lot of you are dealing with life-threatening experiences on a daily basis, and therefore your need to act upon fear on a daily basis is not necessary. So when that's happening and you're training your brain to keep acting on fear, keep acting on fear, keep acting on fear, then you're training your kid's brain to keep acting on fear, because what we know to be true is that a child's brain develops based on their environment and on their ability to see how they can solve their own problems. And so what we know for highly sensitive kids is that, based on the concept of differential susceptibility, which we went over last week, I think, or the week before. Either way, it was in the last 2 weeks, so go ahead and watch that video if you haven't caught it yet. What we know to be true is that highly sensitive kids are highly more susceptible to a change in their environment or to their environment than non-highly sensitive kids. So what this means is that if you are operating from fear and wait and see, or I have to exert power over my kid to make sure that they listen to me because I don't think they'll ever listen to me any other way, then they're going to see from you that that's how we live our lives. This is the value we have as a family, that we have to experience a negative emotion in our body and act upon it without thinking it through. And so what happens? Your child learns from a body up perspective, the fear in their body, the brain tells them what to do, act, perspective, that when I feel fear, it means something's dangerous, and it means I have to respond in that way. So what happens? A meltdown happens, irritability happens, an outburst happens. So your fear-based response to parenting your kid is perpetuating the meltdown, because you're teaching your child that very tool to manage their emotion. It's their only way that they know how to solve their problem right now. And so if that's the only way they know how to solve their problem right now, then you as a parent need to know and take a clear look at how you're parenting from fear, and whether or not the decisions you make to raise your child are focused on what the worst case scenario of what might happen in the future, or based on understanding that you don't want the worst case scenario to happen, and therefore you're focused on what will happen, and what you're focused on will happen for your child in terms of the possibilities and of all their strengths. When you're focused on that, then you do whatever it takes to make sure that the worst case scenario doesn't happen. If you're focused on the worst case scenario and you operate from that understanding, then you start to get numb to that being a possibility, because it's very hard to perpetually and consistently run away from a scary thing when you're currently in scary things. So let's take this down to real world level. Think about living in, and it's the first thing that's coming to my mind, but when we think about working with my experiences working with families who have lived in war-torn countries, and I've worked over the years as a child therapist. I've worked with the refugees, and so they come from a war-torn country, whether that be an active war or just gang violence all over the place, like families from El Salvador or other South American countries and Central American countries where there's significant chaos going on. You start to dull out the small, scary things. So you don't jump at gunshots anymore, or you hit the floor. Things like that. What I want to do is draw a parallel to what you guys are experiencing parenting a highly sensitive kid with daily meltdowns. When your child is just constantly struggling with big emotion, and it's going on like this all day long, or most days more often than not, if I kept doing this, you would eventually learn to tune out my snaps. But your body doesn't. And if you're highly sensitive as a parent, you're twitching right now because I haven't stopped snapping. So what I'm getting at is understanding that you start to lower your standards of what's scary. And so if you start to think about what's not acceptable for your family anymore, then changing that perspective and looking at what's possible and wanting to get to that place starts to feel like it's not even, it's a pipe dream. And we see this with trauma victims. Worked with trauma victims for years, and they change what they want in life. Children, parents as well. And so they're just happy to go through a day where they can watch TV at night. And I have to be honest, I've spoken to many of you, and that is a dream for a lot of you. Let alone take vacations without a meltdown, let alone, walk down the street without worrying whether or not your kid is going to lose it and feel out of control in her big emotions, let alone deciding how you want to dictate your whole day. Just getting to watch a TV show feels like freedom to you. The world is bigger than the screen. The world is bigger than an hour's worth of respite in the evening. And if your dream family life is focused on that, then you're still in survival mode even when dreaming of what's possible for your family. So I encourage you to focus on love. Focus on if your child truly felt like they were able to love themselves. If you felt like every decision you were making was focused on loving your child and loving the potential that you see in your kid, then you would know that there would be no time to waste to solve this problem. And it's a reflection of whether or not you feel like that's capable for you, but also whether or not you feel like you deserve it. Because if you haven't figured it out by now, there must be something wrong with you. And I repeat that because it's something I've heard all the time when I talk to parents. So it's not something that I hold. For you, I know that every parent is worthy, deserving of a happy, hug-filled, sloppy kiss-filled life where constriction in your chest is not dictating your decisions. Now, I use that because that's where I feel fear. It might be different for you. It might be tension in your ears, shoulders up to your ears, tension in your belly, your gut. You understand that better than I do related to your own personal experience of fear. But when we start to look at possibility being in your family's life and what's true for your family, what's possible for your family, being limited by what you see in front of you right now in your current circumstances, then you start to change what's possible for your family. Because if you don't think in the future and know that you can get yourself there and be resourceful to get there, then you won't take action towards that goal. You'll stay stuck. So I want to give you guys some action steps today. I really want you to paint a picture with yourselves. And for some of you who are creative, maybe you do paint. But you can certainly write it down too. If this problem was fixed, you did not endure daily meltdowns on a daily, let alone, on a weekly basis. Get you down to your child expressing negative emotion without body on the floor, without consistent irritability, without that intense emotion on a regular basis. I mean, I'm even taking a deep breath feeling that for you guys. What's possible for you? Because this is what I help my clients do. And when we get to that point, we start to think, check the boxes of their list of things that they get to do. They get to take the vacations. You get to know that you're going to go on vacation and not have to worry about whether or not there will be a meltdown. You get to have your child practice difficult things before it happens, but not from a place of fear. What'll happen next? What if this happens? What if, the what if cycle, but rather when I feel big feelings, this is what I'm going to do. Mommy, sound good to you? Great. Okay, here's where I'm going to go. Show me the hotel room. We'll figure out a place. And so we see 6-year-olds taking action towards managing their emotions ahead of time, but not from a place of fear, not that what if cycle. And so if this is what you want, it's absolutely possible for your family, but you have to see that it's an option for you first. And so that's part of my job here in the group. But you need to dream too. It's not my dream. You need to know that that's an option, and you need to know that that's what you deserve, and that it doesn't just have to be a dream. So when you do that, what you're really doing is you're operating from a place of loving yourself, right? Because if you love yourself to give yourself no limits, then you love yourself to dream about how things will go, and you love yourself to think about how you can get there. So ask yourself this question: what has to happen in order for me to take my first step towards changing this dynamic in the household? Now, whether that be work with somebody or, start reading and listening to all the blogs and all my posts in here and having a conversation with your spouse and working your way through what I teach, or booking a call and getting set up, or taking action in some other way. Operating from that understanding is a very much more empowered place than operating from a place of fear that the worst thing could happen, so therefore you don't want that worst thing to happen, and so you better act now. Now, not to say that's not going to give you a swift kick in the pants, because we can all be motivated that way too. But we don't stay motivated by fear. We only take action from fear, but the motivation to stay motivated beyond that first action is because we see what's possible. So if you don't have end game in sight, where you want your family to be 2, 3, 6 months from now, a year from now, then you're not going to take consistent action towards changing the dynamic. You're going to fall back into your old patterns. So figure that out. Figure out what you want for your family, and then figure out what you need to do to make it happen. And if that means that we need to talk, then great. Get on the phone. We've got that set up. You can go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk, and I'd be happy to help you guys figure out where you want to be based on where you are and what it's going to take to help you get there. And whether or not we'd be a good fit to make that happen, or if there's something else that's more effective or different or more efficient for you, or more appropriate based on your goals. So what we do is ensure that for those of you who really want this, you have to look at both ends of the stick. You have to look at what you fear, and you have to look at what you love. And then you have to make the decision to choose love for yourself, love for your family, love for your child. And when that works out, when you work that out in your mind, when that process works out in your mind, you notice that your gut starts to feel certain. Highly sensitive kids have a really hard time trusting their gut. It's why they're so hesitant. And that is because you as a parent are probably not trusting your gut. And that's a fear-based response. So we see how this is cyclical, right? It affects the neuroscience and neurodevelopment of your child's brain when you operate from that understanding that things are scary and they shouldn't make big decisions because it might go wrong. So when we understand that you can experience more than one emotion at a time, but you can only act upon one at a time, then it's very clear, and just to recap, it's very clear that when you're struggling and you're operating from a place of wanting to be powerful over your kid by teaching them a lesson, whether that be through spanking or timeouts or any other method of ineffective education for your kid, then you're operating from a place of feeling like they'll never learn that lesson again, and there's no possibility for them to learn that lesson in a healthy or calm way. And so, let alone playful. And so if that's the case, then you can't love your kid at that same time because you're fearful of who they might turn out to be. And love sees possibility. And love sees capacity. And love sees growth. And love sees and feels trust. And love feels settled. And when you're operating from that place, you don't make decisions from panic. You make decisions from intuition. And what may or may not induce panic, if your kid's having a meltdown, you're able to calm that emotional response for yourself, and then you're able to move out of that in order to make a clear, calm-headed decision. Calm, clear-headed decision. It's late, guys. So I am going to finish with this. Your child is not just feeling your emotions. They are developing your emotions. So your highly sensitive child is developing how to manage her emotions, his emotions, based on how you manage your own. And so if you're not highly sensitive, then that might mean that you keep it all together, but feel a significant amount of fear inside. Now, your highly sensitive kid, being a kid, can't keep it all inside, number one. Number two, is more overwhelmed by that. And so it just perpetuates the problem. If you are highly sensitive and you've learned to stuff your feelings, then your highly sensitive kid is learning how to stuff their feelings either by not stuffing them at all and thinking that that's unbearable and so exploding all the time, or holding it all in to please other people and exploding, 0 to 60. And know that when you make big decisions about how to raise your kid, it is not possible to teach your child how to truly love themselves when you're using fear-based parenting tactics, because they question their own very worthiness of living when you use those tactics, and that's not teaching self-love. If you perpetuate your child's doubt in themselves, then you are not teaching them to love themselves or to trust themselves to make the right decision. And yeah, I'm going to end at that. So again, if you want clear direction on how to make that happen for your family, and you want to get out of this cycle, and you don't want to keep questioning whether or not you're on the right path while continuing to deal with daily meltdowns, then I encourage you to book a call. We'll talk. We'll figure out whether or not you need to take some certain actions in order to make this happen, and whether or not I can help you get there. Okay? Bye. Have a good night.